Hello and welcome to the Hack Responsibly podcast, where we get to know NetSPI's technical leaders. I'm your host, Karl Fosaaen, and today we'll be speaking with Giles Inkson, the director that oversees Red Team services here at NetSPI. It's a little bit tricky coordinating meetings between Pacific and UK time zones, but Giles and I were able to grab some time and sit down and talk about red teaming and a whole bunch of other things. Here's my conversation with Giles. Welcome to Hack Responsibly, a NetSPI podcast focused on the experience of our NetSPI agents, including insights and trends in the cybersecurity industry. Today, I have Giles Inkson here with me. Giles, you want to give everybody a quick background about yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I look after the red team function at NetSPI, and you may have detected a British accent. I am based in the UK, but don't hold that against me. My background is for a long time I was involved in infrastructure sort of rollout and support, and sort of moved into cybersecurity about I think somewhere approaching 10 years ago now, but it's all a bit of a blur. And I've sort of worked my way through pen testing into sort of red teaming, and now look after that function here. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I've got lots of anecdotes and lots of things about a history in IT support as well before that, so I'm sure we can lean into some of that as part of what I do.
I'm excited to dig into that. We always have good red team stories that pop up here, so very excited about those as well. Speaking of red team stuff, what have you been working on recently?
Quite a few things actually. There's a lot of heat and noise around AI, as I'm sure everybody's aware, in the world. We've been looking at different use cases that sort of align to sort of red teaming ethos, as well as apply how we apply that safely and with the right mindset into red teaming. Equally, we've done a lot of work on building a new C2 framework as well. That's been an interesting activity that we've undertaken within NetSPI. So there's a lot of excitement and buzz about the capability that brings to the team. So that's been a huge part of the last 6 months or so, really, in terms of what I do.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the advancements that are coming up in that space at the moment. AI seems to be changing everything all at once, but also not changing it. It's kind of weird. Definitely speeding things up in certain ways, but ultimately I would say we're falling back on the same techniques, but it doesn't necessarily change the root vulnerabilities that we're attacking.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think much like fashion sense, things kind of go out of fashion and into fashion again. And I think it's helping us rediscover things that might once have been lost, and sort of, find old latent information that was in a sort of a book that's on your bookshelf somewhere that you've thought about giving away, but actually might lead to some kind of exploit. I know there's a lot of sort of com and decom class exploits that have been found that way. Let's be honest. But yeah, we're seeing some exciting potential there. But there's also, there's natural caution in the industry about, what does this lead to? What's the end state? What are we evolving into? And these are normal questions to ask. So far, it's been positive.
Yeah, yeah, I would totally agree there. And we don't have to get too deep into it, but I believe we're about 5 months into DORA at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a sort of a seismic shift in the region in Europe. There's a lot of there's a lot of sort of questions about what that will evolve into, and sort of what sort of the financial industries and the sort of the supporting sector, if you will, what they'll be asked to do, what they'll have, those companies and the supply chain will have to assert about their security, and how will they do testing going forward. It's an important component in the security of the region, and it's interesting to see how many organizations are really sort of jumping into that with both hands, and sort of working on quite everything down to the sort of contractual level and the sort of cybersecurity program level, how they react to it.
Yeah, anytime there's new compliance that pops up, it always seems like there's a bit of a shift, and we have to adjust to it to a certain degree. So it sounds like that's going well.
Yeah, very much so.
So bringing things back a little bit here, how did you get your start in cybersecurity?
That's a fairly long story, if I'm honest. So I worked for a long time on sort of infrastructure and sort of transformational change within IT and IT support. As I may have mentioned, the that led me to become enthusiastic about network security. I was building sort of systems for government and sort of radio systems and things like that. And I'd always had a passion for cybersecurity. So I did a lot of self-study and self-starting. And then sort of eventually I managed to sort of demonstrate through doing things like hacking labs and those types of things that enthusiasm had translated into some practical skill. And then as many do, I put myself out into market. I sort of promoted myself in that space and thankfully landed a job at a sort of a penetration testing company. And I guess the rest is history there, really, to be honest. A lot of time and effort on training myself and doing labs and that type of thing.
Cool. So, kind of self-starting that, did you always have a background in kind of pulling apart stuff or hacking on stuff when you were younger?
I was quite interested in memory-based exploits in computer games to be able to get more coins, more health, all that sort
Yep.
of thing back in the day. So that's kind of where I had my first exposure to some of that aspect of things. There's a lot of people in this profession who, dare I say it, started by being curious about the games that they were playing, what they could do to gain an advantage in them. And I think it's a rich source of many a great red teamer, hacker, pen tester, all that type of thing.
Yeah, I think that might have been probably my first exposure was through I don't know if you had Game Genie or Game
Yep.
Shark. Yep. Super Nintendo, the Game Genie. I still have the book for it, probably somewhere around here, with all the cheat codes in it and editing memory in there. Had no idea what I was doing at the time. I just knew that I was putting in codes and it was giving me extra lives in Mario. So you mentioned radio. Do you still keep up with any of the radio stuff?
I don't do a lot of SDR based stuff, which is a lot of the hardware sort of side of the fence. But I still do keep my skills sharp from time to time when I get the opportunity at the sort of the sort of RF villages and those types of things at the hacking conferences. My main focus actually in the latter years has been significant sort of effort and time placed into things like Active Directory and enterprise systems. So I've moved on a little bit from there, if I'm honest, but still some hobbyist enthusiasm. Maybe one day soon I'll get some time to sort of figure out how to hack a garage door for my garage because it's broken at the moment.
There you go. That is one that I've always been curious about the whole rolling code thing and how you could, emulate that or, replicate your own, garage door opener kind of thing. Uh, I think every year for probably the last 10 years, going back to DEF CON, I always tell myself, 6 months beforehand, oh yeah, this year I'm going to study up. I'm going to take the ham radio license test because I always do that at the radio village there. And then I never do it. And I've been meaning to for probably 10 years at this point. And one of these times, maybe it's this year, I'll actually go out and do it.
You and me both.
So thinking about, earlier in your cybersecurity career here, if you could go back and talk to yourself, as you're getting started here, is there any advice that you would give yourself as you're getting started or advice you'd give to someone who's getting started in the cybersecurity career path?
Well, this might be a deeply personal reference, but I tend to push myself quite hard. That would be don't forget to get some sleep because you are a better hacker if you've had some sleep and you can remember you can remember those memory addresses. That would be one thing. Is if you're looking to do exploitation, having a fresh mind is important. But equally for others in that space, I think passion and drive and being able to demonstrate that to others in a way that sort of is unique. I think that helps you stand aside from the crowd. What have you done? How have you leveraged your world experience? What bred the bug in you, if you will, to be able to sort of do these types of things? And I think if I'm talking to people, say in an interview process, or they're keen to join us. You can see that kind of infectious enthusiasm that comes from people. It's sort of passion driven is important. Equally, don't forget to sleep because passion is one thing, but passion into no sleep is another.
I would totally agree with that. Having been, several days into an on-site engagement and you're putting in, 9, 10-hour days sometimes, and by that last day, you're just ready to go home and get some sleep. You, you start running out of mental bandwidth to actually do the good and fun things. It's more about getting the job done at that point sometimes, but totally agree with you on the sleep. So, speaking of doing engagements here, do you have a tool or technique or approach that you just can't live without?
It's an interesting one. I think from a sort of a red team perspective, things that kind of blend into the background are really important. So using utilities, I have a particularly unusual method sometimes. Doing things that blend into the background, sort of lol bins, lol bas, whatever you want to call them. That type of approach has been something that I've always been enthusiastic about. I have a pet tool that I really like. That's a very old tool. It's almost freeware now. It's not quite. You can't actually buy a license, but it never sort of pesters you to be able to buy the license. There's two tools called Lex and Lisa. And they're really good for picking through permissions and Active Directory attributes. And they've got some great insights there in terms of sort of how security is set, and it can really help you sort of look deeper into things. Equally, they come from a fairly well-known, valid source, and I think things like that, and AD Explorer, for instance, are gold mines of information that for a long time weren't signatured, weren't known to the wider sort of security tools, EDR, that type of thing out there. And so for me, I'd say the tools that are built into the operating systems that you're on are the most important components, and learning to use those well is a key aspect to get right, and something that I deeply treasure.
Yeah, same here. One of my favorite types of engagements is the host-based and or like thick app pen testing. And granted, I haven't done one of those for quite a long time here. What I always refer to them as stupid computer tricks of like, this shouldn't be allowed to do this, or you shouldn't be able to do this using just a built-in binary that's on the system. But here we are. It's the weird little tricks to get an Explorer box to open, and then you can navigate to cmd.exe and get a command prompt, those kind of things. Not quite lolbin exactly, but it's kind of like making do with what you have there and being able to get some of these program escape techniques working there. Personally, love those. It's like that shouldn't work, but magically somehow it does.
I love a breakout test as well, and similar types of testing. They are, for me, one of my favorites, because there's always a way. You just have to find your way to it and use that deduction to be able to get there.
Yes, totally agreed with you there. So the overall field of kind of pen testing and red teaming is has definitely evolved over the years. I can think back, 10 years ago where we were at from a red team perspective, and I think a lot of people actually just got confused between what a red team and a pen test was. I think we probably still deal with that to a certain degree today. But, what kind of shifts have you seen in the overall landscape and that space over time here? I guess as you've been involved in the space.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of change that we've seen. So certain types of change are often technology driven. So there was a long period of time where SaaS products were the thing that was happening and everywhere. They're fairly ubiquitous now, but these types of things are being rolled out more and more. We're seeing more more use of federated identity as a result of that. So attacks have lent towards federated identity sources, and sort of how those authentication flows work. Equally, I think in the last sort of few years, the kind of constraints that, and rightly so, one might argue, the constraints that things like EDR place on sort of red team vendors, and sort of what's possible, likewise attackers. It's developed a lot in the last few years. So we as an organization and within our red team, we've worked a lot on sort of building that capability, and sort of what does it take to overcome the more advanced challenges that we see. And I think the development in EDR capability has been a big part of it. Likewise, not as a technical level, the sort of evolve kind of the way that culture has evolved in organizations. We're starting to see people pick up on things like social engineering, and certain types of laws more. So there's more sort of general awareness that leads to a good baseline of security. Equally, the big two-letter acronym that's everywhere at the moment, AI is a huge sort of game changer for a lot of organizations in different ways. And for us, I think in terms of the sort of the way that it's driving things, it's changed a lot of how detection has worked. There's a lot of going on from heuristic analysis, but into AI and LLM based sort of detection metrics and capabilities that look at sort of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it with a much more sort of aware lens that this could be something in the context of an attack. There are gaps. There's always ways around those systems, but yeah, we're seeing a lot of change there and very rapid pace change.
So I'm curious, from a detection standpoint, do you feel like you've run into more situations where you're getting detected partly because of AI?
Um, yes and no. It depends. It depends on the application. So we're seeing a difference in the way that those detections are being triaged. For instance, that's a key component. So we had an example where AI was being used to decide whether or not an event was false positive, and actually we were finding that in this instance, AI marked something that was an act of ours that was. I mean, it was malicious as a false positive, so there could be
Oh,
that side of it. But equally, it is also at the same time becoming more capable at identifying things that are real threats that might just get lost in the noise. So it's more about a fundamental change in what constitutes OPSEC from a red teaming capability perspective. We need to know what's watching us, how it's watching us, and how we adapt our behavior to try and overcome those controls. And I think that's the main thing from that perspective is it's a change rather than an upgrade at this moment in time. We may well see an upgrade in the coming months, but in years, there's lots of change, very rapid change there. But that's something that is evolving. So we don't have the full suite of evidence there yet.
hmm. Yeah, I have found it extremely useful in building up detection rules. So, for everybody else's context, my background from a detective controls testing perspective is more on the Azure side of things, and helping make recommendations for Azure detections that people can build up. Using AI to kind of build up some of those rules has been really helpful. In practice, actually detecting those things, I think a lot of folks that are in the Azure space are probably a little behind the ball, and a lot of those Azure attacks are not getting detected, or at least that's what we're seeing in a lot of cases. But to your point about AI, it's definitely been very helpful with kind of building up those rules and strengthening that detection right up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the challenges is there's got to be a corpus of data that those AI sort of items could be trained on to be able to enable them to make those decisions. If it's the AI doing the controlling of those, but for generating, like you say, generating rule sets and likely candidates, you can get a rapid transition of maturity that comes from that to be able to do. To deploy rules that may take you years to build up through structured testing and the right strategic hires into the SOC and getting the right talent to be able to build those rules out. You can do a lot of that sort of acceleration through things like AI because there's evidence that these are the right types of things to build up, but they may not come with the product you buy. And or the service that you buy. And so actually it can help you a lot with rapid maturing of those types of services and products.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, speaking of maturing approaches to all of this, have you seen clients change how they approach red teaming over the years?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. So the awareness of what a red team is or is not and the boundaries of that have improved. We still get cases where people sort of have a thinking that's a bit behind the curve, but our job as educators is to try and help with that. I think one of the key components that again that we've seen is, we're seeing from our clients a lot of people asking, how do we use AI in red teaming, and what does that mean to our data, to your capability? Will you let an MCP or an agent or something like that run wild in our systems as part of a red team? And we've got a duty of care to handle that in the right way with how we use that. So that's been a sort of core component of change, I think, in terms of how clients do their due diligence on us to make sure that we're capable enough to handle their data and their systems safely, whilst also overcoming their protective preventative controls in their business. And there's a fine line between just absolutely sort of sailing past them, but using something that's risky and not appropriate, and calibrating to the right level and sort of being safe and appropriate with their data.
Yes. I feel like we're almost coming back to the Metasploit AutoPwn days. I don't know if you ever ran into that or made use of it. But I remember running into some client engagements where a previous pen tester basically showed up and just started running the Metasploit AutoPwn, which basically just tries everything to a certain degree. And it started causing so many problems. And it was not targeted and it was not very smart about, what was going on. And that firm was obviously not brought back because we were stepping in and taking over the pen test for the next year. And I do worry about AI kind of going that direction. That the models are getting better and the harnesses around them to do kind of agentic pen testing and red teaming are getting better. But I don't know if we're quite at that level of trust. Everything's very immature at the moment. And I think as things begin to mature and people get a little bit more comfortable with it, I think we'll see much more adoption around that. But it's a very interesting space to be in at the moment. In terms of engagements, are there any kind of common gaps that you're seeing just over and over again, client to client, or is it just very different from each different client?
There's a lot of variation in the types of systems that we're in, and the types of clients that we're asked to engage with. If you're talking about, say, for instance, a traditional sort of Active Directory infrastructure, we tend to see the same types and themes of issues that are in there. That's been a long-standing thing. But if you're on an engagement, or we work through an engagement, for instance, where those companies, for instance, they use Mac as their endpoints, or they rely on SaaS products to do most of their business level work. That can be quite a different sort of set of things that we see. I think the kind of the consistent thread is always going to be there's an element of people. So user awareness. How do they treat things? Are they susceptible to sort of coercion, social engineering, and that type of thing? But equally, fundamental things like how do you control credentials? Who can use them? How do you manage RBAC? Who has access to what? When is a core component, and we see that again and again and again. It could be password hygiene, it could be things like that, for instance. And equally, it's also about you have an organization will often have a security model, what they think they've secured, and the ways that they the controls that they've implemented. There's often gaps in how those are applied, or they've bought a product that covers a thing and they don't know exactly how it works, and there's gaps in the way that product might cover them. EDR is a common one where they think EDR will discover all the things, it will detect all the things, but much like any other product or any car you buy, it has things it's good at and things that it's bad at. So typically we see organizations invest in security products, assuming that they will do something and that it doesn't do that function, and that's where gaps appear. And that's a common one that we see.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It might be a good product, but unless you tune it to your specific environment, it's not really going to give you the full value.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of memorable engagements, do you have a favorite one that stuck out? Obviously without sharing any client data or anything like that, but any particularly memorable engagements you've done?
I've had one or two in my time. One of my personal favorites was an engagement where um, it was a fairly large organization that had a global footprint, and they regularly took in groups of people in sort of waves. So they take on people in 2 times a year or what have you, and they do big camps where they set everyone up and sort of get them ready for their business, and then they'd evaluate them if they're good to stay, and then they would sort of carry on going. One of the interesting things is that there was a culture of sort of sharing that initial sort of information about sort of how to set yourself up, how things work, IT onboarding, and individuals within that business had shared it to a document sharing platform. And there was also a YouTube video link embedded in one of those documents. Effectively, there were sort of, I think it was about 3 frames within that YouTube video where they showed the default username and password that when users were onboarded, it was set to. And so as a result of that, we were able to understand what their username and password format would be for default users. We were also aware as part of this information that when users were reset or they left the business, their password was set back to its default value as part of their scripting. So we were able to build sort of a structured spray that would guess from the top 10,000 names that sort of who those users might be, the sort of the statistically likely users. But this was very much targeted to the way they structured their UPN format. And we were able to sort of password spray our way in and find users where MFA had been reset. There was no tap code set. So we were able to get initial access at the identity level that way. The interesting thing is they also used a common sort of zero trust agent, which doesn't publish its installer over the internet. We were also able to get that onto a mobile device and proxy through the mobile device to be able to gain access to their systems. Ultimately, that led us to sort of getting some of the highest level of access. We managed to compromise their domain through the zero trust network because they'd exposed the internal AD resources there. It was a really interesting adventure because we had hurdles at every single step. They'd implemented the sorts of controls that you would expect to see at that particular point in time. We'd found ways to bypass CAP policies. We'd found ways to get past the zero trust network restrictions that they'd put in place. So every time there was a challenge, we were able to overcome those. And this organization had some very spicy, shall we say, sort of interesting traps within AD for things like SACLs, for sort of canaries and things like that. They'd got a very large organization to come in and consult about how they harden their Active Directory infrastructure. And interestingly, the sort of the pièce de résistance was that actually there was at that point in time there's a common tool that we use for attack path mapping. There was a parsing error in it, so it didn't show a particular pathway that existed, and we did manual checking to see if it was there to actually be able to find that logic bug in it, and we were able to escalate to domain admin through that method because it was missed by one of the tools that is widely used in the industry. So one of those magic point in time, blimey, actually, we've followed up on this and we've done the manual research. And that was a really exciting end-to-end challenge for myself personally as part of the engagement. But there's all sorts of interesting things that happen all the time. And that's just my own personal experience.
I love those kind of perfect timing things, because it sounded like you just had that perfect little window where that wasn't going to be detected, and maybe they hadn't rescanned, with updated software to see where that path was. I had an on-site engagement with Scott Sutherland on our team here. This is 12 years ago at this point. But it happened to time perfectly with the release of the MS14-068, the Kerberos, was it the pack signing bug? I don't remember. It was with Kerberos tickets, and you could basically re-sign or, what was it? You could basically change permissions within the Kerberos ticket and basically just mint it and take it. And all you needed were domain credentials, and you could elevate up to domain admin effectively. It just happened to come out the week that Scott and I were going on site. So it was just it was just perfect timing. It was that nice little window where we had proof of concept code, we could exploit it, and nobody had caught up with the patches yet. And granted, this was 10 plus years ago. Those windows, I think, were a little bit longer back then. I think those windows have tightened up since then. But I love those perfect little windows. You get that nice little vulnerability you can make use of and just escalate or get where you need to get to and kind of abuse that little window for a little bit.
Yeah, time can be your friend as well as your enemy on these things, I think, can't it? And it's amazing to be able to help clients at that really early juncture as well and make them aware of these types of exploits really, really early on in those chains. Interesting kind of another analogy for me. This is just as there was a release around the sort of ADCS exploits, and there wasn't really any weaponized code around at that point in time. I also once had a test where we were able to demonstrate that proof of concept and build that manual exploit before there was any proof of concept out there. And again, that was just a point in time of this subject alternate name abuse had just come into the public awareness. There wasn't really any tooling or public code out there that would help you exploit it. But when you're able to, on a red team, demonstrate that there's this kind of, this is at that point in time, there's this advanced thing that people don't really know very much about, there's not general awareness of, and demonstrate that to a client, that's a really exciting feel because it helps them react in a way that they can protect their business really, really soon, really early, really, and avoid compromise as much as possible.
Well, and as much as this might sound like an ego thing, it's always nice to be really impressive to a client because clients will see that and go, "Oh, wow, you're like really on top of that. You're really smart. Like you're on top of all of these security things that are happening. If you can build something that quickly and understand what's going on, it's always great to add that additional value. And it's kind of fun when clients are impressed or excited about that. I think those are some of the best clients, the ones that kind of nerd out with you on some of the exploits that you're doing. Oh, you were able to exploit that? That is a really cool one. I love that one. Those folks are always fun to work with.
100%. We're all doing it because we're passionate. And I think, when people share that passion, that's an important thing.
Yeah, yeah. I've certainly had engagements where it's kind of the opposite of somebody's required to do this pen test and they're kind of begrudgingly doing it, and we're just kind of getting dragged along through it, and the job gets done, and they're not really excited about it. Those are way less fun than ones where people are actively engaged and excited to be doing the testing. Changing things up a little bit here, not completely switching out of shop talk here, but getting to know you a little bit better here. Do you have a favorite piece of what we call hacker media, like a book, movie, TV show, anything like that that might be hacker adjacent?
I'll be honest, I'm probably one of the few people who hasn't watched Hackers in the hacking community.
Okay.
And I think I was always probably distracted at some point when that was going around. But Snow Crash is the one that I've read that is in the kind of the zeitgeist. That's probably the one that would say that for me. But otherwise, yeah, no, I've so far not actually watched that many hacker related things.
Totally fair and very good choice with Snow Crash there. I believe somebody else called that one out. I'd have to go back and double check who, but yeah, we'll have to get you a copy of Hackers. And I don't know if you prefer DVD or Blu-ray or stream it, but I feel like that's almost required watching at this point in our industry.
It's my shameful secret. It really is.
Well, now it's out. So other hacker related things here, conferences being a big part of our industry here. Do you have a favorite hacker con or any favorite conferences?
So it's really interesting actually. Again, I'm probably one of those people that's not yet been to DEF CON. This year will be probably my first year where I've been to DEF CON, so excited about that one. But as far as conferences go, actually one of the best experiences that I had of a conference was one that I attended in the Netherlands. It was one called Hardware.io, and that was a really interesting one because that was just as the first Nintendo Switch hacks came out, and there were some interesting
Oh,
talks around sort of how that came to pass. And what the individuals were doing to sort of Nintendo is famed for its kind of intellectual property controls and sort of how stringent they are on that side. So it was a really interesting conference, and to sort of be among people who were in the hardware space who were really really smart at what they did. And I can pretend that I understood all of it, but I absolutely didn't. There were some really 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 good deep dive technical talks there when I went there. Likewise, also SteelCon in the UK is another one that's really, really good, well respected by a lot of people, and Troopers as well. It's sort of in sort of in the EU. There's so many good conferences. It's difficult sometimes to choose.
yeah, I feel like being in the UK, it's way harder for you to get to Las Vegas for DEF CON every year, whereas I live in the same time zone as Las Vegas, so it's extremely easy for me. But yeah, I'd love to get out to more of the European conferences. I am getting out to Troopers this year, so very excited to go out to that one.
Yeah, it's a great conference. It is a really, really good conference, and people really should check it out.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very excited about that. And the speaker list and other folks that I know who will be there this year, I think that's one of my favorite things about just conferences in general is you get to meet up with other industry professionals that you might just interact with online or through LinkedIn or X or whatever, and just kind of have, online conversations with and be able to just sit down with folks and kind of talk shop and kind of like we're talking right now. Just get some background and bounce ideas. There's so many great ideas that pop up at these conferences. So outside of work, a lot of us, here at NetSPI do home labs, servers, other kind of personal tech projects. Do you have any personal tech project things that you've been working on?
So I guess kind of qualifies as tech. So I quite like listening to music. It helps sort of center me for those long hours of red teaming and filling in Excel spreadsheets and stuff like that I do as a service lead as well. But I'm actually in the process of sort of building out for the first time actually a sort of a home audio setup that I'm sort of adding into my new house. I've just moved house. So I'm looking to make it sort of whole home audio, which is going to be exciting. I haven't gone as far as doing things like Home Assistant and going, really, really deep into it. Strangely enough, one of my colleagues recently he's got a coffee cup temperature monitor, so he knows the optimum temperature that his coffee is at, so he can drink it. And he knows how full his mug is based on his Home Assistant, and he's got a little wall world for it. Maybe one day I'll get that far, but yeah, I'm fairly vanilla when it comes to tech. I like a good computer. I've got a water cooled rig, for instance. I built a custom loop for my home PC. Do a bit of gaming with that sort of thing as well. And I'm lucky enough to have a 5090, so that's something I've been
Ooh.
putting some good exercise through doing AI and playing a few games as well.
I've been tempted to upgrade. I believe I have a 3060 in here and would love to upgrade. So one of these days. So I was going to ask with the radio things, we've had a couple other prior guests here bring it up, but are you familiar with Meshtastic?
Well, I have a passing knowledge of Meshtastic. I'm not the most in-depth expert on that side, but yes, I'm aware of it and the enthusiasm that others have had. Let's put it that way.
I got really into it probably 6, 7 months ago and haven't done as much in the last, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 months here, but trying to get back into it, over the summer here as it's nicer. I'm gonna try and get an outdoor node set up, and it definitely seems like it's picked up adoption wise here, at least in the States. Curious to see how things look in the UK.
I think there's some feverish individuals who've been going quite deep with it. It is one of those things that I think it's a pathway that once you start, it's a slippery slope. Let's put it that way. But yeah, no, there is. I think it's quite popular within the general sort of hacker community and the sort of the hardware community, quite a bit. Yeah, very much so. But unfortunately, I've not yet got the bug.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do, speaking of home automation stuff, hoping to do some of that via Meshtastic. Just time constraints and life and all of those things kind of get in the way. So one of these days I'll get back into it and I'll I'll share it with the folks. I think that's one of the things I love working here at NetSPI is just the open collaboration that we have and kind of sharing some of these things internally. Talking about video game setups or I'm curious about the home audio stuff. We'll have to take that offline because I'm trying to figure out some stuff internally here for my house and trying to wire through my house has just been a mess. So we don't have to talk about it here, but very curious to see what solutions you're coming up with there. But being able to share that internally with folks here and just the collaboration on even non-work kind of stuff, chatting about that stuff has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've always really enjoyed. From the sort of the NetSPI community is not only the million and one hobbyist Slack channels that we've got, but also some of the things that people are doing outside of the hacking realm, doing building passion projects and sort of doing things. I think one of my personal favorites that I saw recently was there was a channel for rock collectors. And everybody made the customary Dwayne Johnson joke about that's the rock that they collect. But just the amazing things that people get enthusiastic about and sort of how deep they go. We're a passionate group of people. And I think sort of that personality shines through. In the region, in EMEA, in the UK as well, the kind of a lot of the team has come through sort of recommendation and through sort of having friendship links and knowing knowing people that are good, that are sort of really solid in the industry, and there's a really strong sense of bond within the team, and that's for me that's one of the most important things in any place of work is is to sort of, you know, be able to talk to your colleagues outside of the work loop, but also to be able to sort of engage with them and to sort of have that sort of, you know, it's a big part of your life that you are spending with these people. You need to be able to talk to them and sort of, you know, share some war stories and to sort of, you know, have life beyond cybersecurity is often, you know, it can be a challenge, and I think it's not here, which is nice.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there. Well, that kind of wraps up more the personal side of things here. You know, if folks want to get in touch with you, do you have any preferred, I don't know, social media channels or any way that folks can get in touch with you?
I'm a recluse. I want to stay away from people as much as possible. No, so from my side, I don't have Twitter or X. I've got a GitHub, but that will remain nameless because there's some exploit code in there. But reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always fairly talkative there. Happy to do that, and hopefully, you know, if you're enthusiastic about cybersecurity, whoever this is on the other end of the recording, maybe I'll see you at DEF CON, maybe I'll see you at some of those conferences, and we can connect in person.
There you go. Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn wise, relatively active over there. I see the occasional traffic from you over there, but good to hear that folks can kind of reach out there. And if anybody does have any questions for Giles or, you know, general questions for NetSPI, feel free to leave a comment on the video. Feel free to reach out to us through the NetSPI website. And yeah. Okay, last question here. Any other things that you might want to promote or share?
I mean, if I was to do a selfish plug probably actually would probably be more appropriate. We're doing a lot more stuff in Red Team land at the moment, and we've got some really interesting things that we're building out there in terms of the capability. So, you know, we've been looking at sort of how do we do more condensed kind of red team type assessments with more focus. You know, how do we assess preventative controls as much as we might do detection and response. So, you know, we've been working on quite a bit of stuff there as well, something called scenario-based test, which is our answer to that issue. And also, you know, we have a much more sort of campaign-focused model, something we call MAS, which is the Managed Adversarial Simulation Service. And that's kind of like a you know, it's the sort of the halfway house between a continuous test and a sort of a point in time red team. A lot of organizations struggle with operationalizing the outputs of a red team. And so MAS for us is how we can have a stronger link to our clients to be able to sort of help them along, work through a campaign of sprints or individual sort of tests as we see it. And that could be from any of the sort of adversary simulation type sources. So social engineering, red teaming, purple teaming, you know, any of the kind of different archetypes of adversary simulation. And that's been a really interesting prospect because it allows us to tell a story in that relationship. So definitely, I would say if you're curious about what that might look like or either those might look like, please do reach out. Otherwise, promotion. Otherwise, probably that's it from my side, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that all sounds super interesting. And if that sounds interesting to anybody, feel free to reach out. But really appreciate having you on today, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
And that was our conversation with Giles Inkson. Thanks for joining this episode of Hack Responsibly. If you'd like to see more episodes, make sure that you like, subscribe, follow all the things, and check out the NetSPI website to get connected with us. Thanks again, and remember, hack responsibly.